understand, there were two different ballot initiatives passed. In November of 2016, the City of LA passed Proposition Triple H. Proposition Triple H is a bond, which means it's money that can be used for capital, that can be used for buying property, constructing buildings. It's capital money, it's not services money. So that's Triple H, and I'll talk about what's happening with Triple H. But just so you understand, there was a second measure passed by the county in March of 2017, which is Measure H. Just to make it confusing, we use the same letters. So Triple H is the city, H is the county. H was a 1/4-cent sales tax, which means it's much broader what it can be used for. It can be used for services, it can be used for homelessness prevention, rental assistance, housing, employment. It's a much broader use of uses. And oftentimes these funding sources, when it's in the City of LA, work together. So like Triple H, we build a lot of permanent supportive housing. Triple H funds the capital, H funds the services that go on site in those buildings. So they're not mutually exclusive, they often work together, but they're a little different in how they function. So Triple H, like I said, is capital money. It can be used to build facilities. The primary use is housing. So there's a lot of permanent supportive housing being built through Triple H, but it can also be used for facilities like bridge housing, shelters, health clinics. So it's a variety of uses, but all focused on helping people who are experiencing homelessness. So that measure is up and running, housing's being built, and there is housing being built right here in the Valley. One of the things our office has been working on is really trying to make sure that we push for those funds to serve the whole geography of the Valley. Because one of the things we see is that to make these buildings cost efficient, which is a big issue, they're very expensive to build. People will sometimes buy where land is cheaper, so we tend to have a lot of developers coming to us for support for buildings in Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez's district and Councilwoman Nuri Martinez's district. So we're seeing housing being built in Sylmar, in Van Nuys, which is great. We need housing, but we also want to see it being built in Councilmember Bob Blumenfield's district and Councilman Mitch Englander's district. So we're really pushing folks to try and think more broadly about the geography where they're building. But we do have stuff that's in construction now. I know Sylmar Court opened recently, and there was a grand opening, I think I can't remember if it was a month or 2 months ago. But we are starting to see buildings opening, which is great. And you're gonna see a lot more, because a lot of things, like I said, this measure just passed in 2016, and often these buildings take about 3 years. So you're gonna start to see more as we get further into the measure. There's a lot of things in the pipeline, things in construction now, and we're hoping that we see more openings. I wanna be clear that we help people connect to housing in a lot of different ways. So I was just talking about site-based permanent supportive housing, where someone buys a property, they build a building. A lot of what the resources on the H side go to are tenant-based assistance, which means we're helping somebody pay their rent, but they're working with landlords in the private market. I will be very honest, that's gotten a lot more challenging. Rents have really skyrocketed. We have a very low vacancy rate, and so it's been much harder for us. We do see people getting housing for the tenant-based assistance, and that can be everything from Section 8 to rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a locally funded subsidy for shorter term rental assistance. We have a lot of folks who are homeless because they've just simply been priced out of an apartment. Some folks need a lot of support, some folks need less support. Rapid rehousing is often for the folks who need a little less support, helps them get back into an apartment, get stable in the community, and often they can take over paying their own rent. So we're funding a lot of sort of everything, whether it be rapid rehousing, tenant-based permanent supportive housing, site-based permanent supportive housing. We're trying to sort of fund all of it, and I think that would be my biggest message to you. There is no silver bullet to the crisis we're facing. There's no one thing that's going to solve this. there are tens of thousands of people who need housing, and so we're trying to do everything. We're trying to do everything with the dollars we have. We're trying to do everything we can on a policy front. On Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors approved the first measure to do rent stabilization in the unincorporated areas, so City of LA has rent stabilization. Thank you. That was a lot of work and very controversial, and there were a lot of political fights, but we got the first step passed. So like I was saying, rent stabilization, you've had in the City of LA since 1978, but outside the City of LA, we don't have it. The Board of Supervisors can't tell other cities what to do around land use, but we do control land use for the unincorporated areas. So we passed our first rent stabilization measure for the unincorporated areas, and that'll go into effect in about 90 days. So we're trying to do everything on the policy side in addition to what we're doing with the dollars. There's been a lot of focus on bridge housing as well, because we need places for people to go until they get into permanent housing. We have so much bridge housing happening in the valley, which is great, and we're working on it across our entire district. The same thing I said about wanting to see geographic distribution in the valley, we feel that way in our district, so I'm working on bridge housing on the west side, which is really challenging, but I'm hoping we're gonna make something happen. But you've got a lot happening here. Our office worked a lot on the Silmar Armory, which is gonna be bridge housing for women, which will open next year, hopefully early next year. I am working on that project every day, trying to get it into construction and over the finish line. We're also working on a site in Canoga Park, the old West Valley Community Mental Health Center, or the West Valley Mental Health Center. It didn't have community in the name. So we're looking at trying to convert that building into bridge housing. There's an open house on September 20th for a bridge housing site that Councilman David Rue is pushing in Sherman Oaks. So we're trying to get another site in Sherman Oaks. There's one more that I can't think of it. I think there's a fourth one. But anyway, there's a lot happening around bridge housing right now, which is great. Trying to get safe parking, anything where we can get people to a place of safety. Safe parking's not ideal, but we can do it pretty quickly. And we have about 8,000 people living in their vehicles, so it's important that they have a safe place to sleep and be able to get a good night's rest, as good as you can get in a car. So we are working on trying to expand safe parking lots as well. So really, like I said, there's no magic bullet. We're just trying to do as much as we can and also shore up other infrastructure that supports people. The board also passed a board and care motion on Tuesday. Thank you.
Hello, Barbara.
Barbara has been advocating for this for a long time, and we've been working on it for a long time. And we are starting to already see, even before that motion, DMH was working on trying to get supplemental payments to board and cares. A lot of our board and cares are many decades old. The financial model just does not work today, and so trying to get more resources so we stop losing board and cares, which we've seen them closing like crazy. Looking at our hospital campuses, what can we do on our hospital campuses, use that land. I mean, we truly are like trying to turn over every single stone and get everything done that we can, because the crisis is so great. Before I open up to the audience, Patricia, did I miss either of your questions that you emailed to me before I open it up?
No.
Okay, so let me open it up. More than anything, I want to answer your questions. Yes, in the back.
Could you go into a little more detail about the board and care motion that the supervisor is resting?
Yeah, so we know that there's a whole bunch of needs that board and cares have. There's the most immediate need, which is that $33 a day is not enough to stay open, so we need to get them more money, and really trying to do that in a comprehensive way where the health agency works with a comprehensive strategy, because one of the things we were sort of struggling with is DHS was doing it one way and DMH was not really doing it at all, and we kind of need them to work together. So one is just trying to get the money to the board and cares so they don't close. But then there's a whole bunch of other needs the board and cares have. A lot of these buildings are really old. A lot of them have a lot of deferred maintenance. We're gonna have to think not only about getting the money to operate, but also how to keep them sustainable so they can stay open a lot more time. So the motion really asks the departments to look at both of those issues, to start collecting a lot more data about the board and cares and really tracking them much more closely so that we can intervene early. One of the things that's been happening a lot right now is we'll find out a board and care is closing in 2 weeks. We tend to get notice so late in the process, it's really hard for us to intervene. And the reality is, like, we can't compete with the private market. Real estate prices are insane. But if we can keep these owners happy before they put their property on the private market, we can often keep them open. Trying to come in at the back end isn't working well, and so we need a lot more data so that we can be communicating and addressing these issues before they get to a crisis point, because it's hard when there's a developer standing there saying, I'm gonna give you $20 million for this property, for us to compete at that point. But what we want is to keep them happy so they never put it on the private market. So we have to have the data so we can intervene more earlier in the process.
There's one question that I forgot. One of the things we really want, and we're so glad you got to hear all of how amazing this group is, we want to help.
Yeah.
We want to know how we can have an ongoing discussion so that we can bring our resources that we might know about to you, and that we could also talk about the NIMBYism and then what's been happening with that.
Yes, and that is huge. So it was interesting, when you look at Measure H, the county measure, so we had a lot of support. I think 69% of the electorate supported the measure, which is great. But when you really talk to voters about why they supported the measure, we see quite a split. So you have people who supported the measure because they're empathetic, they want people to get help, they think it's a moral crisis that people are on the streets, and they're there to really help us really make this work. There are other people who supported the measure because they just want homelessness to disappear. And so when we come into their community and we say, okay, great, you gave us this money, this is wonderful, let us build housing, let us build bridge housing. They say, oh, no, 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 no. I supported that measure because I don't want anything to do with this. And so we are struggling with NIMBYism. I will say, in general, our communities have been wonderful. We've had really supportive neighborhood councils, but we have definitely had some challenging constituents who have not been happy about what we're doing. And it really helps to have people engaged in this who say, this is something I really care about. I care about it because I experienced homelessness. I care about it because my sister experienced homelessness. I care about it because I don't want my neighbor to experience homelessness. So a great way to connect into this is the Everyone In campaign. So the United Way launched a campaign called Everyone In. And they're really working to organize people to show up when we're having the public meetings, so that people in communities hear that there's both support and opposition. We're not trying to get to 100% support, that's unrealistic, but if we can have both support and opposition, it makes it a lot easier to move forward. Where we get into real trouble is when we hold a community meeting and everybody in the room says this is the worst thing I've ever heard of. So we really need both sides to show up. So I encourage you to sign up for Everyone In, and then they will contact you when there's meetings in your community to show up and express your support, which is really important. And there's a lot happening right now. I'll get to your question in 1 second. Like I said, there's an open house in Sherman Oaks on the 20th. We just did a meeting in Canoga Park on Tuesday night. There's tons of meetings right now about trying to get things cited, and we need all the support we can get.